Bueno, muy buenas tardes para todos y bienvenidos al ciclo de conferencias que estamos organizando sobre síntesis de imágenes utilizando inteligencia artificial. El día de hoy nos acompaña Hilda Chourak. Hilda es ingeniera biomédica y actualmente se encuentra realizando sus estudios doctorales en la Universidad de Rennes 1 en el laboratorio del LTSI y actualmente se encuentra en Australia, en Brisbane. Ella ha trabajado en áreas relacionadas con procesamiento de imágenes y actualmente en su doctorado se encuentra trabajando en el área de radiología, en la cual se encuentra desarrollando modelos basados en Deep Learning para hacer síntesis de imágenes de MRI a partir de CT y está trabajando en pruebas de calidad para justamente evaluar este tipo de imágenes. Así que de eso estará hablándonos hoy y le damos entonces la bienvenida a Hilda. Hilda, thank you very much for joining us today, and just the stage is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. So first of all, hello everybody. As Ruben said, my name is Hilda, and I'm actually a PhD student in the University of Rennes 1. I'm working with two different laboratories, so the LTSI in Rennes and the eHealth Research Center at the CSIRO in Brisbane. So thank you for inviting me to this event, and I'm really happy to talk with you about a part of my PhD, which is image synthesis for external beam radiation therapy. So first, we will have an insight on the clinical aspects of the study, more specifically, on the radiation therapy part and what is going on to the patient when he's going through the treatment workflow. After that, we'll have a brief introduction on deep learning, and we will see three different networks that I'm used to work with during my PhD, which are a UNet, a GAN, and a cycle GAN. After that, we'll see also some results and how the images are usually assessed. So let's go. What is radiation therapy? First, you have to know that around two cancers on 3 are treated by external beam radiation therapy. The principle of this method is quite simple, is to destroy or kill, if you prefer, cancer cells using X-ray. So to destroy this, we have LINAC. LINAC is a device that is accelerates particles, and you're going to send the particles to destroy the DNA of the cells, so going to destroy the cancer cells. The aim is to maximize the dose in the tumor. So the dose is actually the energy, the high level of energy that the device can send to destroy the cell. So we want to maximize it in the tumor while minimizing the dose in the organ surrounding the tumor. So I hope it's clear for you. So the dose is delivered inside the body. The beam goes through the skin, delivers the dose inside, and without doing any lesion on the body. So why it is done? It is done to cure a cancer. Let's say that you have a patient that have an early stage prostate cancer. You can use only the external beam radiation therapy to cure him. It may also be combined with other treatments, like hormone therapy, when it's a more serious cancer, but it's still confined to your prostate, right? And after surgery, sometimes, to reduce the risk of the cancer returning, we do a little bit of beam radiation therapy to avoid this, to be sure that all the cells are destroyed. This method presents different advantages. So first, it's a non-invasive treatment. So the beam goes through your skin, but you won't have to have any surgery or anything. It preserves the anatomy and the functionality of the organs. And as it's a local treatment, which means it treats a specific part of your body, yes, it still avoids surgery. So it kind of joins the non-invasive part. It could also be curative or palliative. So a curative treatment will be, like I said before, to treat the cancer. You have a patient with a prostate cancer, you can cure him with that. But sometimes you can't really cure the patient. So the cancer starts to spread in the body, and you can have some tumor cells that growing up, for example, in the bones. So we can use the external beam radiation therapy to reduce the pain of the patient. So what's happened to the patient now? Let's say we have a patient. We will call him Mr. S. Oncologist diagnoses Mr. S with prostate cancer, and they prescribe external beam radiation to treat him, right? So we will now follow the journey of Mr. S through the wonderful world of radiation oncology. First of all, the treatment, you have to know that the treatment is divided into two main parts. You have a planification part and a part where the dose is delivered. The planification part is crucial because it's from this that depends all the other part of the treatment. So we'll have a lot of imaging modalities here and a lot of process, but it's really important to do it carefully. So first, we're going to define a treatment position. This position will be the reference position during all the treatment. As we can't have any clue of what is going inside, we have to be sure that the patient is in the same position to be sure that the treatment is going to the same place every time, right? So first, Mr. S is gonna do a planification CT. So the advantage of the CT is that it offers information of the density of tissue and so on electron density of the organs. That means that from that, we'll be able to know how the beam will interact with the body and so where the dose will be delivered. But it's not enough. We'll also need to do a diagnosis MRI. Why? Because with the MRI, you have a better soft tissue delineation. That means you have a better contrast, so you can do a better soft tissue delineation, and you can target the tumor more easily. You can be more accurate while doing that. So both images are registered. For those who's not familiar with that, the registration process is when you overlay two images. So in this case, it's a rigid registration. That means you do only transformation like translation, rotation, stuff like that. So I was saying that you overlay the MRI on the planification CT. And you can segmentate the tumor and the surrounding organ. So for Mr. S, it's a prostate cancer. So the target will be the tumor on the prostate. And the organs that we want to preserve from radiation are the rectum, the bladder, the vesical seminals, and the bones. So the oncologist will do the segmentation, and then they will use this contour to determine in which angles the beam has to come inside the body. So you can see right here, you can see the beams coming through the body. So the oncologist is gonna compute the beam angles, the weight. So the weight will be like the kind of energy that's going to be involved in the beam to be sure that it's going to the appropriate place. And then they can compute the dose that is going to be delivered. I hope it's clear for you. After that, the dose. So a dose planification, a dose treatment looks like that. So in red, you have the high level of energy. And the more you go to the blue, the less energy you have. Okay? So the oncologist validates the dose. and they're going to take care of the respect of those constraints. So while looking at that, they're going to be sure that the bladder not receive a large amount of irradiation, same for the rectum, and so on. Okay. Okay, we have finally everything we need for the treatment, right? So we can start to deliver the dose. The standard treatment for prostate cancer is 2 gray of dose by fraction. So the gray is a unit for energy by volume. Yes, so we see it's kind of units for irradiation, if you prefer. So standard, usually we have 2 gray of dose by fraction. So by fraction is by session. And you have to do that 5 days a week during around 6 or 8 weeks. So the tumor gonna reach around 80 gray at the end of the treatment, more or less. So we put the patient in the same treatment position than the one defined during the planification. Okay. But Mr. S will still have to do a cone beam CT at each session. So what is a cone beam CT? It's a kind of CT, but you can acquire faster, and even it offers poor contrast of soft tissue, is still less irradiating than the CT. So it's better to do a CBCT than a CT for every day to limit the radiation sent to the patient by the imaging modality. So as previously, we're gonna register rigidly, so with translation and rotation, the CT and the CBCT, right? We're gonna take the bones as reference, and we're gonna be sure that the 2 images are well overlaid. So the bones are well aligned, if you prefer. This way, yes, you have also just a little precision. It's like most of the linear accelerator, so LINAC, have a CBCT incorporated in it. So it really is the process. So now you can deliver the dose according to the plan defined before. And Mr. S will have to repeat this process every day until the end of the treatment. But external beam radiation therapy has also some drawbacks. Okay, so for example, it implies many imaging modalities: MRI, CT, CBCT. It's a lot for a patient, and even more when you know that CT and CBCT are irradiating modalities. Okay, and it also don't take into account how the anatomy change inside the body. As you can see on this video, sorry for the quality of the image, even if the patient is the same treatment position, while if considering if the bladder is full or not, if the rectum is full or not, it will move, everything will move inside. So the prostate and so the tumor may change position according to the one was defined during the planification. And so using the same treatment, you're going to target the same, let's say the tumor is here. You're going to target the same area, but one day you will irradiate less the tumor and more the rectum, for example. So, and you have no clue what is going on inside. So it's kind of, it can lead to irradiation of healthy organs, and this can have consequences. It also involves several steps, including registration. So we talk about registration, talk also about bias, and this may lead to mistakes also, because rigid registration, you may align as you want, but if the bladder is not the same size from a day to another, you will still have some outcomes. So how to simplify the process? What can we do? An idea was to replace CT by MRI for the planning. So why the MRI? Because it offers better delineation of the tumor and the organ at risk. As I said before, we have a better contrast on soft tissue with MRI. Add to that, it's a non-ionizing modality. So you can do MRI every day if you want. It won't have any impact on patient health, or at least less than doing a CT every day. Replacing the CT by the MRI also reduces the risk of error, as no more registration is needed. So the planification is therefore simpler and more accurate. Right? To summarize, with MRI instead of CT for the planification, we will have no more registration needed. It's going to simplify the treatment planning and the treatment delivery. It will limit the risk of toxicity. And when I'm talking about toxicity, I'm talking about irradiation of healthy organs. So in the case of prostate cancer, this may lead to urinary issue, rectal bleeding, erectile issue, and no one wants that. So it's better to reduce this risk, right? Using the MRI also offers the possibility to adapt the treatment at each session, because you can resegment it and replan the treatment, modifying a little bit the treatment to adapt to the session. But the problem with MRI is that we have no information about electron density of tissue. So, as I said before, we had this information thanks to the CT, because with the CT, we have information of the density of tissue, and we can compute the electron density from this data. But with the MRI, we don't have any clue of that. So what do we do? How can we process? We can generate CT from MRI, of course. So many methods exist to do that, right? We have like bulk density-based methods, atlas-based methods, but we will focus on this based on deep learning model today. Before seeing some architecture used in the specific context, I'm just gonna do a quick reminder on what deep learning is for those who are not really familiar with it. Okay, so deep learning is a subset of machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. The aim of artificial intelligence is to enable a machine to mimic human behavior. Okay? Machine learning technique is a way to achieve artificial intelligence, sorry, it's pretty hard for me, using algorithms trained with data. And deep learning is a specific type of machine learning which use algorithm inspired by human brain. So we call this neural networks. So what is the main difference between machine learning and deep learning? Let's take object classification as example. Okay? So with the machine learning model, we have a model that will learn to classify according some features that you're gonna put yourself in the algorithm. So you're gonna say to the algorithm, look at the size, the color, the shape of the object, for example, to determine the different classes. For the deep learning, the neural network will learn by itself, if I can say. So you will need more data, way more data than for machine learning, but the model will learn to classify with the features that is going to extract itself from the images. So this is the basic model of deep learning model, I can say. So first, we will have an input layer here, which artificial neuron, and this input layer will be connected to other neurons in the what we call hidden layers. So according to the complexity of your model, you can have as many layers as you want. And at the output, and after that, you're going to have the output. So this is going to extract the picture, treat the data, and take a conclusion, if I can say. So how deep learning work? So here you have the input neurons. A value is linked to each of them. And you have a weighted mean of all the value that results from the input neurons. This means will go through an activation function. And the aim of the activation function is to determine if the information is relevant or not. Like most of the time, it's going to be a function that put the value between 0 and 1, for example. And if the result of the weight mean of the input neuron is after going through the activation function is under 0.5, the output neuron won't be activated. And if it's more, it's going to be activated. Okay. I hope it makes sense for you. So the advantages of deep learning models is that it's really fast to generate data. And most of the time, results are accurate and robust. When I say robust, is that you can put whatever number of images you want. You will have an accurate result every time. Not perfect, of course, but accurate. The drawback of deep learning is that you need a really large amount of data, really, to train the model. The more data you have, the more chance you have to have an efficient deep learning model. Okay, and the training time is also really time consuming. It depends of the power of your computer, so you can't use like your personal laptop for that unless you have a really crazy personal laptop. And it might be pretty expensive to do deep learning, that you need good GPU. So GPUs stand for graphics processing unit, and these GPU are kind of expensive. So now let's go back to our subject, okay, if you mind, which is how to synthesize CT from MRI. Okay, so the aim is to predict Hounsfield units. So I'm going to talk about HU for the rest of the presentation. So predict Hounsfield unit from MRI to generate CT scan. Okay, there is no linear link between the intensities of MRI and the Hounsfield units. That's why we has to use some complicated algorithm to do the conversion. So Hounsfield unit is the unit used in CT scan. So as you can see, the value goes to minus 1000 for the air, and can go can be superior to 1000 for the cortical bones. So most of the time the soft tissue are around 30 to 45, and the bladder is around 0 when it's full. So you have a really big gap of value on one image. So it gives the information of the density, of tissue. And it allows, as I was saying, I will never insist enough about that, but it helps to compute the electron density, and this is what we need for the planning, for the dose planning. So for our study, we had a cohort of 39 patients with prostate cancer. Each patient had a CT and an MRI. So it's a 3D volume. So we have two 3D volumes, CT and MRI, for each patient. As we said previously, deep learning models need really large amount of data to learn properly. So obviously, 39 is not enough. We can't work with 3D volume in our case. So we decided to work with axial 2D slices. Axial is when you cut the volume in this, this axis. So that gives us, so according to the z-axis, if you prefer, that gives us around 5,000 images for each modality. It's not huge compared to certain database, but we do what we can with what we have, right? We had chosen a threefold validation, a threefold cross-validation, process to validate the model. So I'm going to explain quickly. It's you have a data set. So for us, 39 patients, 5,000 2D slices, and we randomly split this data set in 3 parts, right? So 2 parts were selected for the training and 1 for the validation. We repeat this 3 times, so we have generated synthetic CT for the 39 patients without including bias linked to the, like, if you have an image in the training, you can't have an image in the validation because you already learned on this image, so it's going to be sorry. So now we're going to see some of the architecture. We're going to start with the unit, okay? So all the images were co-registered. So as I said previously, the rigid registration is when you do transformation like translation, rotation, this kind of, it's not at a voxel-wise level. You overlaid as much as you can the structure like this. But a non-rigid registration is when you did it, but at a voxel-wise level, sorry. So that you're gonna define a transformation for each voxel to have the most perfect as you can overlaid between structure, all the structure, including the external, the body contour, sorry. So we need to do that first, and we can put at input of the unit MRI and CT. One is missing here. The model is trained until the loss function, which here it's a L2 loss. It's a way to measure the distance between the CT and the synthetic CT. Okay, so when this loss function start to converge, we can consider that the unit is trained. So let's go a little bit deeper. What is a unit? So the unit deep learning model that we use was implemented, as I say, using 2D architecture. 2D architecture. So this is composed with an encoding part here and a decoding part. Each layer is a convolution, as you can see here. ReLU is the activation function that we used. And batch normalization, it's a way to normalize the data and to improve to help the model to learn faster by normalizing the input every time. So going back to the encoding part, sorry. The encoding part aims to extract features from the target MRI, right? And the decoding part here aim to reconstruct, rebuild, sorry for my accent, I really do my best, the synthetic CT using the feature extract from the encoding part. Oh, I forgot to say that the batch normalization also improves the convergence of the loss function. So after that, we thought, okay, so GAN works pretty well, but I think we can do better. So why not trying the architecture with a second neural network to build a GAN? So a GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Network. It's composed of a generator and a discriminator. So we keep the unit for the generator, and we choose a patch GAN for the discriminator. No worries, I'm going to explain in more details soon. Now, so we use the same dataset than previously, and the same validation process that we used previously also. So for each patient in the training dataset, we also have to co-register MRI and CT at the voxel-wise level. So do a non-rigid registration. Okay. Then we train the generator, so the unit, with this data. And the synthesized image, synthesized CT here, in our case, go through the discriminator. The aim of the discriminator is to determine if the image that you receive is a true or a fake one, a generated one. So the aim of the generator here is to fool the discriminator. Once he managed to do images that the discriminator cannot distinguish from the true one to fake one, we can consider that the model is trained. So patch GAN architecture looks like this, for those who are interested in. Actually, patch GAN is a type of discriminator for GAN, and you're gonna extract compare features locally by patch, what we say about patch, and you're gonna classify if each patch is an image of the image is real or not, and you're gonna do like averaging the data to provide output 1 or 0. If you consider that it's a true CT, 1, and if he conclude that it's a fake CT, will be 0. Okay. Now, let's talk about the last architecture for today. So, cycle GAN. Both of the previous architecture that we saw need pair data. When I say pair data, I mean you have in input the CT and the MRI of the same patient that is registered together, and each for that any images that you have. It's always 2 by 2. So we can extract feature from the CT and compare from the MRI and compare the features for the same image. But as we say, non-rigid registration might not be perfect, right? It's even pretty hard to have a perfect registration, and so we can induce bias in the generative process. So with the cycle GAN, we can get rid of this. CT and MRI can also come from different patients. We do not care about that. So this is what it can. This schema resume the cycle GAN process. So actually, it's kind of a double GAN. It's not kind of; it's a double GAN. You have 2 generator and 2 discriminator. So one, let's say X, is the MRI space, and Y stands for the CT space. So with the cycle GAN, you can generate a CT from MRI and then generate another MRI from the generated CT. After that, you can compare the original MRI with the generated MRI. And you can also do this in the other way. So generate MRI from the CT and synthetic CT from the generated MRI. And so compare the two images. Yeah, sorry. I hope you didn't expect to have an insight on the architecture we use, because we are still working on it, and also on other possibility, other deep learning models. So I don't have any details to provide you. Sorry. So, okay, we have different models, we can generate images, that's great, but how can we assess the quality of this image? Because the point is we want the CT to be accurate, to be able to do a dose planning properly. So most of the time in the literature, you're going to find mean absolute error and mean error. So this is two image endpoints, and by image endpoint, I'm talking about comparing the Hounsfield units of the CT and the corresponding synthetic CT. So the mean absolute error will be the absolute difference of Hounsfield unit between the reference and the synthetic one. So n will be the number of voxels, so we can compute the mean absolute error in the whole pelvis or by structure, by bones or soft tissue. And the mean error is the difference of Hounsfield units of the CT, the reference one, to the one generated. Same, we compute that in the whole pelvis or by structure. For both methods, the ideal value is 0 Hounsfield units. That's what we aim, the goal we have. Why do we compute both of them? The mean absolute error actually will give information on how far is the prediction from the one from the reference one. And with the mean error, we will know if the model tend to underestimate or overestimate according if it's a positive or negative value. So overestimate or underestimate the predicted Hounsfield unit. So, for example, for the both models that I presented before, we can see that in the whole pelvis, the GAN has around 36 Hounsfield units of difference with the unit. And we can consider the whole pelvis, the bones, or the soft tissue. The GAN always have better results. But I agree, it's not big difference. Okay, so the unit works pretty well also. You might wonder, but why the bones are so the bones error is so high. Actually, it's kind of linked to the fact that, as we saw before, the cortical bones have Hounsfield unit value way superior than the rest of the body. So we say that for the soft tissue, it's around 30 Hounsfield units, and for the cortical bones, it's it's more than 1,000 Hounsfield units. So you can easily have the high differences. Okay. So we presented the most common metrics, so the most common way to assess the image. But these two are of course, not the only one. You can also find often the PSNR. It's a way to assess the noise in the image. We have the SSIM. It's a measure of similarity. So you're gonna compare the contrast and luminance from the reference ones to the generated one. So this one will be more, will assess more the global quality of the image. And we also have the BRISC. BRISC actually, it's not used yet in the literature, but I think that there is some potential because it's one method that do not take into account, you don't need reference image, okay? So for the PSNR, SSEM, mean absolute error, mean error, you always compare the reference image with the generated image. So for the same patient, the same data, you compare voxel by voxel or the structure. But we aim to assess an image without reference because we might not have always reference. like the aim is to have MRI from CT. So we want to do a CT to have an MRI to generate a CT and then compare. That doesn't make sense in a clinical workflow. So the BRISC is a machine learning based method to assess the quality of an image. Not used yet, but have potential. And of course, the most important in all of this, it's not the intensity. I mean, it's important because it has an impact on the dose. But what we need is really to assess the consequences on the dose. Let's say you have a difference of 30 ounce field unit at a point. If there is no consequences on the dose, we can still use the image in a clinical workflow. So there is some dosimetric endpoint, like the gamma index and the dose volume histogram comparison. So there are both ways to compare for the gamma index to locally compare the dose of the one generated from the reference image and the one generated from the generated image for the same plan. And the dose volume histogram is also a way to compare the dose received by volume, let's say for 50% of the bladder or for the prostate or for the bones or whatever. So to conclude, deep learning are increasingly used in this context. I mean, in the external beam radiation therapy universe. So for synthesized image, like CT from MRI, as I said, and also to do automatic segmentation. This is another crucial step of the process. And it's really time consuming to do this by hand for oncologists. So to have an automatic way to do that will save also time. And there is some studies that propose some way to generate those calculations, those plans, sorry. All of this can be used in other locations, like for brain cancer, for lung cancer, for breast cancer, or whatever. The results are fast and accurate. This is the most important benefits that deep learning models offer. Okay, so it will reduce the treatment planning time and the risk of toxicity. So all of this is really beneficial for the patient. And that's what we want. We want to improve the patient care and limit the secondary effect for the patient. This is really the key point of all of this. But there is some drawbacks also, because deep learning actually is not fully trusted yet by the clinician. And I understand it's kind of black box. We don't really know what's going on inside. We have no control on what does the algorithm. So if we train, even with a large amount of data, an algorithm, it might have issue in the prediction, especially for anatomy that is different from the one in the training cohort. If you have prosthesis and if the algorithm was not trained for that, you may have issue. And also if the MRI, so the input image that go through the network as artifacts or has been done with other device or present is from another sequence. There's still too many uncertainty to use this. So what's next? As I said before, results are usually assessed using full reference metric. So it's really comparing the reference with the generated. If we could offer a process that will be able to assess each synthetic CT before it is used for the clinical workflow, like we produce an image and we can say, okay, I've checked, this is, we can use this for the dose plan, for the dose calculation, and add a regulatory approval will, all of this will increase clinician trust and open the door of deep learning into a safe clinical workflow. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any question, it will be a pleasure for me to answer.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Hilda. It was very interesting work. And so far, we don't have any question. Let's wait a little bit if anyone in the chat want to introduce a question. Si alguien de pronto en la audiencia quiere poner alguna pregunta. But meanwhile, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I would like to know if for the MRI images that you show that you're working with, I would like to know if you're working with DCE MRI or regular MRI images for generating the CT sequences.
You ask for which sequences we use for the generation? That's it?
If you're using dynamic contrast enhanced MRI or using regular MRI scans.
We're using T2 weighted MRI sequences. Always, we don't mix the sequence, and we don't use any contrast. I don't know if it was your question. So you're asking if we add contrast products for the image?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
if you
no.
use contrast agents for
no.
generating the MRI sequences, no.
No, sometimes with some of the images we had, there has contrast products in the bladder, but that's it. We trained the model with the dataset with really spare according to that for the bladder. I mean,
Thank
but
you.
that's it.
And now that you ask, I would also like to know if which MRI sequences are you using for generating the CT?
Yeah, so we use T2 weighted MRI for this.
Oh, great, excellent. We have a couple questions in the chat. Carlos pregunta, do you have any qualitative measure of how good the synthesis is?
So there is the results that I presented, and so this is just the mean absolute error and the mean error of both. But I also work, so I didn't have the time to present this, but we work on the voxel base analysis workflow. I think you can, it's not published yet, but there is a conference paper on that. So if you want more, have a local visualization of the error, yes, it's possible, but I don't have it right now.
Okay. And Jaime Soto asked, can we have access to the source code?
So the two architecture that I present are already published. So you can have all the detail on the architecture, not the source code, but all the detail on the architecture in the paper published by L'Argent and all in the Red Journal in, do you want me to, it was in 2019. I can send the link if you want.
Okay, thank you. And Gloria Diaz says, hi Hilda, thanks for the presentation. And Kevin Osorno asks, have you thought about adding attention layers to your work?
No. So to be honest, I'm more focusing on the quality assessment right now, but I will be glad to have more detail on. I don't really know what attention layers are, so someone can explain me. I can think about it.
I think it's a new brand of operations for deep learning models. They also known as transformers. Maybe if you have heard of them.
No, and what they aim for?
They introduce another nonlinear operation, which is called an attention. It's mainly based in something related, like for example, the hash tables in programming, which we introduce another nonlinear transformation that has demonstrated better performance in comparison, for example, with convolutions in conventional layers. So they have been really powerful for developing, for tackling like some applications, for example, like natural language processing, and they're very interesting. They have been showing us very good results. So maybe that's one of the reasons Kevin is asking.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
yes.
interesting. So I'm gonna keep an eye on this. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. So, Hilda, I have another question for you. As you said at first, you used unit, and then you used again based on the unit using the same architecture for the generator. I have a question because later on you used non-supervised strategy, which is a cycle GAN. But I would like to know how did you handle, because for what I understood, you don't have paired images. You don't
For the
have
cycle gun?
no, not for the cycle gun, for the unit. I don't know if the images are completely registered for the unit and the conventional
Yeah,
gun.
they are. Yeah.
They are registered.
Yeah.
Okay, because
Yeah. Every time we register for each patient. So we use 26 patients for the training phase. As I said, we use the 2D slices. And for each pair of data of the patient, so CT, MRI, we always do the registration before the training.
okay,
So
so
it's an
I
intermodality registration.
I imagine that for the cycle gun you didn't use the registration at all,
No,
right?
that's the point, yeah, to avoid, because with registration, we still have some errors. As I said, it's pretty hard to have a perfect registration. So it might include blazes. So yes, that's why we thought about cycle gun.
Exactly. That was my doubt. So, well, I don't think we don't have any more questions. So, Hilda, thank you very much for your presentation. You
Thanks
have
for your
a very
attention.
interesting work.
Thank
And,
you.
y esto lo diré en español, muchas gracias a todas las personas en la audiencia que siguieron y se conectaron con nosotros. Nos veremos la próxima semana con la última conferencia que tendremos en nuestro ciclo. Y muchísimas gracias por asistir.
Thank you, everyone.